We're here in New Milford, Connecticut, which is allegedly one of the towns that Gilmore Girls was inspired by.
A comfort show is like a warm cup of coffee, one that's heated to the exact right temperature, filled with a delicate blend of rich yet soothing flavor to warm the heart and mind after a long day. If I had to pick such a drink to represent Gilmore Girls, I would pair this coffee with some lavender-infused simple syrup, topped with some orange for a nice crisp note. But as the architecture and urban planning nerd that I am, whenever I curl up on the couch to enjoy this delectable beverage of a show, something always doesn't seem right. For a town of just under 10,000 people, Stars Hollow feels too dense, too big for the small town it's supposed to portray. Now regardless, Gilmore Girls does a very good job at idealizing the very homey and quaint feeling, one that really envelops you in that tight-knit community. I mean, just the idea of being able to take a brisk walk to the town square or a corner store and seeing everyone you know on the street, all your friends and family, that's really what we all want from our town, a sense of comfort and belonging. My own childhood was the exact opposite, and perhaps that's why Stars Hollow strikes such a comforting note with me. The ideals of newer suburban developments, especially those in sprawling, fast-growing Sunbelt cities, made it so that neighbors seemed more like distant acquaintances, with the closest store being a CVS over a mile away. Ironically, the place where I grew up had about 8 times the population of Stars Hollow, yet these two towns resulted in completely different landscapes. This all leads to the central idea of what really defines a tight-knit community, and does Stars Hollow really depict those principles, or is it just too idealized? To answer this, we need to take a trip and maybe even make an interpretive map/painting of what Stars Hollow would really look like. You can find prints of both in the description. One quiet autumn morning, Catherine and I woke up bright and early to catch a train up north. I would have vlogged a bit before we got on the train, but we were running kind of late, so it was just a rush to get there before our 8 a.m. train left. I'll admit it was beautiful to see the sunrise for once, and the serene ride gave us a little bit of time to nap and plan out our day.
Stars Hollow is a fictional town, of course, but there are real-life examples that inspired this quirky, colorful place. Blogs and articles often cite Connecticut towns such as Washington Depot, West Hartford, Litchfield, Kent, New Milford. So to get a genuine experience, I decided to pick one of those. To get to our real-life Stars Hollow, Catherine and I needed to take the Metro North New Haven line to South Norwalk. There we could transfer to the smaller Danbury branch to head deeper into Connecticut. This was one of the most scenic rides I had ever taken, with winding streams, rolling fields, and beautiful fall colors throughout the route. However, the Danbury branch can only get us as far as, well, Danbury. To travel the remaining 13 miles to New Milford, we had to take a Hart Transit bus. I figured it wouldn't be too bad. After all, we could experience how Rory traveled to high school all that time. And let me tell you, she must have felt awful after that ride, because it was a thoroughly nauseating experience.
But finally, after the nearly 4-hour journey, we made it to Stars Hollow, New Milford. I'll be honest, I didn't expect the streetscape to be this lively. There were kids frolicking in the town green for the local Halloween event, rows and rows of charming buildings and cute shops along the major corridors. I feel like this town green, the common space, acts as a true connective element for New Milford. Having centralized open space allows for a naturally communal atmosphere, and it helps facilitate meetings, large events, and casual run-ins that wouldn't happen otherwise. Perhaps that's why Stars Hollow both includes this key gathering space, but also finds so many uses for it. The town square is the most versatile and beneficial idealization that we can make for a fictional place.
Now visually, New Milford looks the most like Stars Hollow than any New England town that I've been able to find, at least in Connecticut. There's a lot of shops on one main street with very historic buildings. There's a town green, although in the show they call it a town square. There's even a gazebo, there's a church, actually there are 3 churches. So everything looks pretty much just like Stars Hollow. There's just one problem. New Milford has a population of about 28,000 people versus
Stars Hollow, which is supposed to have a population, I guess, between like 2,000 and 10,000 or something. This is a lot bigger of a city, and yet Stars Hollow feels almost exactly like this.
Now, we have to be careful when we're talking about population because sometimes cities can have really expansive boundaries, which make it seem bigger, versus other towns that could have really small boundaries. To solve this, let's turn to population density as a comparable metric, which basically just means how many people per square mile are there. In this case, it's true that New Milford is more dense than pretty much any other Connecticut town that inspired Gilmore Girls. However, looking back on this argument, I'm not sure it's necessarily that fair. There are plenty of New England towns that are just as dense as New Milford, but have an official population more like that of Stars Hollow. But interestingly, I don't think this changes the underlying fact that when TV shows idealize small towns, they turn to denser urban centers because that facilitates a more communal environment. Back in New Milford, Catherine and I were hungry, so we set out to find a charming diner like Luke's to have some lunch. We ended up eating at a place called River and Rail Cafe. River and Rail sounds like an interesting name, but I'm sure it won't be important later on. While it wasn't quite a diner per se, it was a cute little shop and it definitely felt more upscale compared to Luke's. During our meal, we talked about one of the major plot points in Gilmore Girls, which is the fact that Luke lives in an apartment above his diner. We started to wonder if New Milford had apartments right above their shops in the main square. After all, it's clear many of the characters live in town square apartments like Brian, Lane, and Zach. To find out more, I turned to my favorite game, looking at apartments on Zillow. At the time, I couldn't find any apartments for rent near the town green, and at the time of this recording, there are only a couple of apartments that close. However, none of those apartments resembled the kind of town square units that we see in this hilariously awkward scene.
Who is that?
Lorelai,
What are you doing down there?
enjoying some air, getting some exercise, and freezing. Pipe down out there!
Go back to bed, Mrs. Slutsky.
Don't talk to me that way, young man!
In order to have this dramatic dynamism between townspeople, you need a diversity of living environments for all the different types of people and backgrounds you want to include. Back in New Milford, even finding housing near the town green has its own strengths.
And looking at it, we notice there's only one actual residence left on the town green itself, which I think is right behind us right there.
It's right there.
It's for sale. And even like, you know, if there's multiple stories in a building, like 2 or 3 and just business on the bottom, a lot of the times we didn't really notice many apartments above. It kind of just looked like extra business working space or office space.
Now, where's Luke gonna get an apartment for him and Jess? Like, they gotta get that
You gotta
apartment,
go to the mile away on a strode and
and then drive in to, work at the diner. Catherine and I ended up exploring the town for a while and imagining how Stars Hollow's places could fit into this real-world example. I wonder if Lorelai works at this inn over here.
yeah.
There. So I feel like if Lorelai and Rory actually lived here, they probably would live on a spur off of this street over here because it's a bit further away from like the center of town, but it's still close enough to where they could like walk to the diner or to any of the shops in the town square. However, one intriguing oddity in New Milford that definitely differed from the show was this cute little building. It may not seem like anything special, but those letters on the side of the structure aren't just my initials. They stand for the New Haven Railroad, and looking around, it's obvious that this used to be a quaint little train station. All of a sudden, the plethora of strange references to railroads all made sense, like the River and Rail Cafe where we had lunch.
Railroads can have a huge economic influence on a town, leading people to locate prominent businesses around the station to take advantage of its connections, which leads to more homes constructed within walking distance. Proximity to strong transit lines like this is a big part of why we build vibrant, walkable, interconnected communities, and those very core characteristics remain even if the transit doesn't exist anymore. After all, having a relatively dense town center helps facilitate interaction, like casually running into people that you know on the street. So why doesn't Gilmore Girls include any train travel? We do get some allusions to rail lines somewhere in the vicinity from the pickle derailment fiasco. Also, there are still some nearby passenger rail lines because we see Rory take the train to Providence in season 7.
You know what I find particularly disgusting?
What?
Train tracks. They remind me somehow of trails left behind by slugs.
I feel like this clip perfectly encapsulates Michelle's energy and indifference, and I'm absolutely here for it. I also really can't believe that those are the only 2 mentions of nearby rail connections, or maybe there just aren't any because they look too much like slugs, Michelle.
In the late 20th century, America increasingly incentivized car travel, and many small-town stations like this were forced to close, leaving it to become the giant parking lot it is today, because that's the only way most people can visit downtown now. That's not aesthetic or ideal, which is probably why we never see this reality when Lorelai and Rory are walking around Stars Hollow.
In the show, I've watched it so many times and I've never seen like a big parking lot that you would usually find in a modern day town center like this, where, you know, things have been so car oriented for a while. So it just speaks to sort of the idealization of small town America. You know, you want this really nice, dense, walkable downtown with, you know, maybe 2 or 3 story buildings and, you know, single family homes on the outside. But the reality of that is that there's so many more dynamics that kind of eat at that ideal style.
I think this overall story is such a shame because now more than ever, the US has a revitalized interest in creating robust public transit, not just using infrequent bus routes as the only form of regional connectivity, like the ride from Cambridge to Milford. I mean, imagine if Rory could have just hopped on a train to go to school at Chilton instead of taking the bus. Stars Hollow is only 30 minutes away from Hartford by car, so it would have made a fast and compelling option. Maybe then that deer wouldn't have run into the car when she missed the bus and made her late in season 1, or maybe Rory would have actually made it to Lorelai's graduation instead of being stuck on a bus coming back from New York. Now that I think about it, there's so many plot points centered around poor bus service. Oops, I made a map of the town. I feel like this whole time I've been talking about the urban form of Stars Hollow, but since it's a fictional place, it's sometimes hard to get your bearings and really conceptualize how these things look. So I've taken all the things we've talked about in this video, as well as many more, to create this, my interpretation of Stars Hollow. It has all of the shops and town buildings that appear in the show, as well as important places like the Gilmore House and Luke's Diner. In addition, there's a nearby train line as a fun little Easter egg. I also took inspiration from the show for the typography and decorative elements. Other than this map, I made a commemorative painting of Stars Hollow, so if you'd like a print of either of these, I put them up on my Etsy, link in the description. It took a surprisingly long time and a lot of effort to make this, so if you'd like to support me in projects like these, I would greatly appreciate it. Regarding the rest of the map, I made sure to incorporate a few apartment buildings and denser sections towards the center to further bolster the landscape that the show depicts. After all, I wanted this to feel like the town really does extend further out so that we can include places like the lake from this very cathartic scene. And I also added a small pocket of shops a bit further from the center because a lot of towns end up having small satellite commercial areas. There were a lot more things that I took into account to really breathe life into this map, but those are the main highlights. Anyways, from what we can tell, Stars Hollow portrays a very dense commercial center that focuses on public space, close walking distance to nearby residences, an overall diversity of housing options, and some regional connectivity. But why does any of this matter? So what if a TV show depicts these characteristics? It's a fictional representation by design. Well, although this is a fictional town, these principles are foundational to urban planning, and the fact that shows like Gilmore Girls use these elements to portray such a cute and quaint town shows that there's a huge desire to have urban environments that reflect them. If we take Stars Hollow as the idealized American town, then maybe that's what we should aim for. We should start thinking of real towns like Stars Hollow, a dense commercial district, a variety of living options, walkable streets, and convenient access to nearby places. Too often, modern suburban planning directly undermines these principles by constructing low-density strip malls, repetitive single-family houses, non-walkable streets, and congested highways as your only form of access. You as an individual have a lot of say when it comes to shaping the world around you. There are a lot of creative ideas that you can use to employ these small town characteristics. You can engage in local politics, whether at a community board or a city council meeting, to support investments in transit and density. Even if there isn't a specific project, talk with your family, friends, and neighbors about whether local planning practices are furthering or detracting from the type of environment in which you want to live. Hopefully with these approaches, you can bring a little bit of Stars Hollow to your own town. Thank you so much for watching this video. It took so much longer than I thought it would, and if you've made it this far, I really appreciate it. As I mentioned, you can find links to the painting and the map in the description below if you'd like to buy your very own print. And yeah, that's really it. Merci pour avoir regardé et ça c'est tout.